Hello, welcome back everyone to Actual English. I'm Jennifer Clyde. It's time for lesson 119 and today's topic is puberty. P-U-B-E-R-T-Y. We all went through puberty, right? Was it a good experience for you or a bad experience? If I were to think back about when I went through puberty, there's not much that I remember. Nothing really serious happened, but I know for a fact that some people say that going through puberty was not easy. It was very difficult because we go through a lot of bodily changes and emotional changes as well. And some find it difficult to actually accept the fact that their body is changing. So girls usually reach puberty before boys do. They may start at the age of 10 to even 14, and boys start a little later at about 12 to about 16 years of age. So what happens when we go through puberty? We go through a lot of changes, as I mentioned, bodily changes. So for guys, for boys, it's when their bodies become mature and they become an adult. So they may start growing hair on their body, on their faces. Their voices may even deepen, right? And their voices may crack in the beginning, but that's when they gradually become a man. Even for girls, they do mature and they do become a woman. That's right. And sometimes they do start, or yes, during puberty, you will start your menstruation cycle, your period cycle, and also you will start to develop breasts. So on and on and on. There are many, many changes that happen to our bodies during puberty. So let's talk about that topic today. Let's now move on over to our first segment. It's time for Actual Talk.
We've been talking about your children a lot lately, and I know there's still a long way to go, but I mean, once they hit teenage years, the rebellious years, how do you feel about that?
I'm not so worried. Actually,
Really?
I'm really glad that we had boys for that reason. Boys are much harder in their first few years and much easier in the later years.
Why do you say that?
Because they're so active, they break a lot of things in the beginning, but girls are much more complicated, and especially when their hormones start going.
Really?
Also, worrying about your daughter dating. Oh, that's something I don't.
You don't have a
worry
daughter
about.
to worry about right now.
Well, we're thinking about it.
Oh, right.
But my wife's worried we'll have another boy.
Yeah. Do you have any sisters or brothers?
I have a sister, so I saw her go through puberty, and that was not fun. I mean, puberty is not fun for anybody. For me, it was pretty simple. At about 12 years old, your voice cracks. And I used to be 12, 13, I don't remember. I used to be a soprano in the choir.
And now
they said, okay, Peter, you don't need to sing anymore. And my voice cracked, and I never sang again.
Yeah, I mean, girls go through a little bit of a voice change as well. I used to be a soprano, but now I'm sort of like an alto.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like, girls go through more complicated issues like body issues, interpersonal things as well, dealing with stressful situation between friends. They get a little bit, I don't know.
I think they're a little bit more hormonal to begin with. But
yeah, we're emotional. Let's put it like that.
We have to deal with, maybe the pain of some growth spurts and our voice changing.
Did you have a really big growth spurt?
Actually, I was a very late bloomer. I had a big growth spurt after high school. So I grew 3 inches and 20 pounds in the year after high school.
Really? My height right now is when I was in first year high school. So no, first year middle school actually.
Right.
Yeah,
girls.
I didn't go after
early.
that.
Welcome back, everyone. Did you enjoy today's conversation? All right, then, let's take you through it line by line. Now, in the beginning, Joanne says, I know there's still a long way to go, but teenage years, the rebellious years, and then she says, how do you feel about that? Now, when you say there is a long way to go, it means that whatever you're talking about is not in the near future. It's somewhere in the far future, perhaps several years later. So she's saying, I know it's not going to happen now. I know it's going to happen many, many years later. So I know it's early to be asking you this question, but teenage years, the rebellious years. How do you feel about that? Now, during our last lesson, our previous lesson, we took a look at the word rebel in the verb form, rebel, which means to resist control, right? So often when parents have a set of rules for their children to follow and kids don't go by those rules, they don't follow those rules or they resist to do so, you would say that your kids are rebellious. They don't do what you want them to do or what you tell them to do. So how do you feel about that? And then Peter says, I'm not so worried. He's not worried. So Joanne says, really? I said the same thing. He says, actually, I'm really glad that we had boys for that reason. And then he gives us detailed information. Boys are much harder in their first few years and much easier in their later years. So he's saying that boys, they will not cause too much trouble, okay? They are harder in the first few years, meaning they're harder to control, harder to raise when they're little. But as they grow older, it gets easier. And it's the other way around with girls. Girls are easier to control, easier to raise when they're little, but as they grow up, there's much more to worry about. So it's harder to raise girls, okay? But Joanne says, all right, so why do you say that? Why do you think so? And he says, because they're so active. They were referring to boys in general. They're so active, they break a lot of things in the beginning. But girls are much more complicated, especially when their hormones start going. So he's comparing girls and boys. Boys are very simple. They break things, they get into fights, but that's about it. But girls are much more complicated, especially when their hormones start going. To start going or to get going means to begin, start to become active, okay? So when their hormones start to become very, very active, it's very difficult to raise girls, okay? That's what he is saying. And then he says also, worrying about your daughter dating. You're talking about dating. Oh, that's something I don't want to worry about. All right, so it's something that he dreads. He does not want to worry about his daughter dating this boy, that boy. It just gives him a headache. And then Joanne says, you don't have a daughter to worry about right now. That's right, he only has 2 sons and he does not have a daughter. He says, right, well, we are, meaning my wife and I are thinking about it. It meaning having another baby, perhaps having a daughter. My wife is worried we'll have another boy. So they want a daughter and they're thinking about having another child, hoping that it's a girl, but his wife is worried that they'll have another boy. Now Joanne says, do you have any sisters or brothers? For those of you that have been tuning in for a long time, yes, you know that Peter has a sister. He says, I have a sister. So I saw her go through, in this case it means to experience, go through puberty. And that was not fun. He says, I mean, puberty is not fun. That's our pattern. It's repeated one more time. Puberty is not fun for anybody. If you say that something is not fun for anybody, you're saying that it is difficult or demanding. It's not an easy task. He says, for me, it was pretty simple. So for Peter, it was simple, but not for his sister. At about 12 years old, your voice cracks. So what happens when your voice cracks? We talked about the word crack when we were talking about skin disorders. Our skin can crack when our skin becomes very, very dry, right? Because you scratch it and it could crack and bleed. But your voice can crack as well. Especially in boys, when they go through puberty, their voices change, right? So their voices often get deeper. But before they get deeper, when they're speaking, it's from that's cracking. So our voices cracks. And he says 12, 13. I don't remember exactly when it is. Now, Joanne talks about girls going through puberty. She says girls go through a little bit of a voice change as well. I did not know that. But you're right, girls go through. One more time, go through means to experience. Girls experience. Girls go through more complicated issues. Issues meaning problems or just instances, situations, like body issues, interpersonal things as well, and also dealing with stressful situations between friends. So she has mentioned a few things that girls go through during puberty. She's mentioned complicated things such as body issues. Bodies change, right? Our bodies mature. Interpersonal things as well. Interpersonal is what? We went over this word a long time ago. Inter. Think of intersection. They cross each other, right? So interpersonal means social, in other words. We're talking about relationships between people, okay? And then dealing with stressful situations between friends. There are many stressful situations between friends, okay? So these are a few things that girls go through during puberty. Now, Peter says, I think they're a little bit more hormonal to begin with. Hormonal, meaning have to do with hormones, related to hormones. So he's saying, much more than boys, girls have to deal with many things that are related to their hormones. Joanne says, yeah, we are emotional. That's right. Girls tend to feel happiness a lot easier than boys. They feel sad all of a sudden. So we have our ups and downs, right? So we're quite moody compared to boys. We're emotional. Let's put it like that. Now, Peter says, we have to deal with the pain of something, okay? This is another way of saying that you have to endure the difficulties of something. You have to experience. You have to deal with the pain of some growth spurts. Okay, let's take a look at growth spurts here. Growth spurts. I think usually boys talk more about growth spurts than girls. Spurt itself means to become active, for example, at a very fast speed, to burst, for example. A growth spurt is when kids, teenage boys, for example, they grow in height all of a sudden. They may grow 5 inches in 1 year. Now that is a growth spurt, when they suddenly grow tall. And our voice change. That's right, growth spurts and voice change. I was a very late bloomer. What's a late bloomer? When we were talking about, I think, acquiring skills, I don't remember exactly which topic it was, but a late bloomer is a person that acquires or develops skills later than others, okay? So even for children, certain children, they learn or develop slower than others. Then they could be called late bloomers. So he's saying he kind of matured later than all the other boys. I had a big growth spurt after high school. Interesting. So Joanne's surprised. She says, after high school? Now, Peter says, I grew 3 inches and 20 pounds in the year after high school. So that's when he grew taller and bigger after he graduated high school. Joanne says, my height right now is when I was in my first year of middle school. I added the same as to help you understand, okay? So she's saying my height right now is the same as the height I was when I was in middle school, which means she didn't grow after middle school. I think I grew up until I was in high school maybe. Yeah, girls tend to stop growing a lot faster than boys. Anyhow, Peter finishes off by saying, girls peak early. Peak. As a noun could mean the very highest point of something. Like the peak of a mountain would be the very tallest part or the top of the mountain. But in this case, it's used in the verb form, okay, which means to reach the highest point or reach the maximum. So he's saying girls peak early, meaning context-wise, girls mature early, okay? Earlier than boys, of course. All right, that does it for today's actual talk. Let's take a listen to it one more time.
We've been talking about your children a lot lately, and I know there's still a long way to go, but I mean, once they hit teenage years, the rebellious years, how do you feel about that?
I'm not so worried. Actually,
Really?
I'm really glad that we had boys for that reason. Boys are much harder in their first few years and much easier in the later years.
Why do you say that?
Because they're so active, they break a lot of things in the beginning, but girls are much more complicated, and especially when the hormones start going.
Really?
Also, worrying about your daughter dating. Oh, that's something I don't.
You don't
wanna
have a
worry
daughter
about.
to worry about right now.
Well, we're thinking about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
But my wife's worried we'll have another boy.
Yeah. Do you have any sisters or brothers?
I have a sister, so I saw her go through puberty, and that was not fun. I mean, puberty is not fun for anybody. For me, it was pretty simple. At about 12 years old, your voice cracks. And I used to be 12, 13, I don't remember. I used to be a soprano in the choir.
And now
they said, okay, Peter, you don't need to sing anymore. And my voice cracked, and I never sang again.
Yeah, I mean, girls go through a little bit of a voice change as well. I used to be a soprano, but now I'm sort of like an alto.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like, girls go through more complicated issues like body issues, interpersonal things as well, dealing with stressful situation between friends. They get a little bit, I don't know.
I think they're a little bit more hormonal to begin with. But
Yeah, we're emotional. Let's
we
put
have
it
to
like
deal with, maybe the pain of some growth spurts and our voice changing.
Did you have a really big growth spurt?
Actually, I was a very late bloomer. I had a big growth spurt after high school. So
After
I grew
high
3
school?
inches and 20 pounds in the year after high school.
Really? My height right now is when I was in first year high school. So
Okay.
no, first year middle school actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Girls
I didn't go
peak
after that.
early.
Now it's time for actual expressions. Let's first of all take a look at some vocab words we have for you here to refresh your memory. We have rebellious. Joanne was talking about if Peter was worried about that rebellious stage, those teenage years, rebellious years. It's an adjective, rebellious, and it means disobedient, unmanageable. They're very difficult to manage, kids, in their rebellious years, and turbulent, meaning they're ups and downs, very hard to control, okay? Moving on to interpersonal. Remember I said if you don't remember the meaning of this word, yes, find inter of the word and get a hint. Inter means crossing, okay? Combining crossing, so we're talking about social. Personal, relationships between people, okay? And hormonal, stress goes right there, relating to hormones. And growth spurt. Keep this in mind. Do not forget growth spurt because you will talk about growth spurts if you happen to talk about puberty in the future. Growth spurts, especially in boys, it's when they suddenly grow tall, okay? So sudden growth in height would be a long way, but a synonym for growth spurt. What about peak, as I mentioned? Today in actual talk, it was used in the verb form. Peak, it means to reach the top, the maximum, and in today's case, reach maturity. Okay, let's now move on to some patterns. Start going. Get going means to begin, to start. So here are some sample sentences. My hormones started going when I turned 12. Okay, so in this case, it means to become very active. It started to act. It started to be active. My hormones started going when I turned 12. Simply meaning my puberty started when I was 12. Things started to change. There were hormonal changes when I turned 12 years old. My sister's emotional changes got going in middle school. Okay, got going, very similar to the first sentence. It just became very active, okay? So, in other words, she went through a lot of emotional changes in middle school. Now let's take a look at the next pattern. something is not fun. It looks very simple. That's true. Something could be really fun and something could be the opposite. This game is not fun, right? But in some other situations, it can be used to express that something is very difficult or very demanding, okay? We were talking about how puberty is not fun. So here are a few sample sentences. Going through puberty was not fun at all. It was not a good experience. Going through puberty was very difficult, in other words. Let's try one more. Giving a speech in front of hundreds of people. Giving a speech in front of many, many people is not fun. Okay, we're not talking about something actually being fun, enjoyable, but in this case, we're saying that giving a speech, talking in front of hundreds of people is difficult. Okay, one more time. Giving a speech in front of hundreds of people is not fun. So it means it's difficult and it is something you do not enjoy doing. And our final pattern is deal with the pain of something. Okay, here's a sample sentence. I had to deal with the pain of being bullied at school. So basically you're talking about how you had to endure or experience the difficulties of something. You have to endure, tolerate, and experience the difficulties of something. I had to experience the difficulties of school bullying. Let's try the sentence. I had to deal with the pain of being bullied at school. Okay, it was a very difficult experience. What about this one? I don't want to deal with the pain of breaking up ever again. Okay, so once again, you're talking about an experience that is very difficult. So, I don't want to deal with the pain of breaking up ever again. I do not want to experience it again. It's too difficult. Okay, that does it for today's actual expressions. Keep these patterns in mind and the vocab words as well, and practice them more on your own. Make them yours.
Going through puberty, now that's a hard thing. I remember when I was 11, that's when it started. And I remember my body changing, and I got my monthly menses. But I felt like it was too soon, and I wasn't ready. And I used to be a really good athlete up until then. And then suddenly my body changed, I grew breasts, and then I lost my balance. I was falling over everywhere. It was not pretty. But I remember thinking that the best thing that could happen to me during puberty is having someone to talk to about it. I felt really alone. And, I just hope that other people, if they go through puberty, when they go through puberty, they'll have someone to talk to.
Now it's time for our final segment, Actual Story. How much of today's actual story did you understand? How much of what Coco said do you agree? Can you relate to her story? Let's take a look at what she said together. She starts off by saying, going through puberty. Go through once again? To experience. Experiencing puberty. Now, that's a hard thing. That's a very difficult thing. In other words, going through puberty is a hard thing, okay? And then she says, I remember when I was 11. Now, she's talking about her personal experience, which is always very important. You are asked a question. The interviewer is asking you a question, or the other person is asking you a question. So I think it's important for you to, first of all, state the topic, and then maybe start off by giving personal experience stories. And that's what she is doing. I remember when I was 11. That's when it started. And of course, we're talking about puberty. Okay, that's when I went through puberty. I remember my body changing. Okay, and then she gives examples of how her body changed. I grew breasts, and then I lost my balance. So you can grow or develop breasts, okay, for girls. Even for some boys, they do develop breasts, but mostly for women, for girls. During puberty, you will grow breasts or develop breasts, and then I lost my balance. I heard from a lot of people that sometimes for girls, there is a time during puberty it's difficult to balance, okay? So she's giving examples of certain body changes or bodily changes. And she now talks about how she felt emotionally. I felt really alone. I felt alone. And then she finishes off by saying, I remember thinking that the best thing that could happen during puberty is having someone to talk to about it. Okay, so she's mentioning how she felt when she was going through puberty, and then she adds on by saying, if anyone around you is going through puberty, it's very important that they have somebody to communicate with, to talk about all these changes that are happening all of a sudden. Okay, thanks to Coco as always, and everyone, hope you enjoyed today's actual story.
Going through puberty, now that's a hard thing. I remember when I was 11, that's when it started. And I remember my body changing, and I got my monthly menses. But I felt like it was too soon, and I wasn't ready. And I used to be a really good athlete up until then. And then suddenly my body changed. I grew breasts. And then I lost my balance. I was falling over everywhere. It was not pretty. But I remember thinking that the best thing that could happen to me during puberty is having someone to talk to about it. I felt really alone. And, I just hope that other people, if they go through puberty, when they go through puberty, they'll have someone to talk to.
Today's topic was once again puberty. We saw the word, we said the word many, many times, puberty. Something we go through once in our lifetime, right? Okay, hope you learned a lot through today's lesson and hope you will have the chance to use the patterns and the vocabs we learned today in the future when you happen to talk about this topic. Okay, in the meantime, what you can do is come on over to our webpage. But, I forgot to tell you, our next lesson will be on rebellious stage. Today, as we were talking about puberty, we talked about teenage years or rebellious years, where children tend to rebel against certain rules or their parents. So that's our next lesson. Now, come to our homepage for more info and to leave comments. Come on over to www.ebse.co.kr. Once you're there, just search for Actual English with Jennifer. Come on by to leave us some comments, feedback, questions, anything. I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. Okay, thanks for joining me. I'll see you again next time. Bye, everyone.